It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Jessica McCain, and she has a short PowerPoint for you.
Welcome, Dr. McCain.
Good evening. Thank you for having us today. I am Dr. McCain, and I am a full-time provider of primary care. I'm a family practice physician in my hometown of Fort Pierce. I'm also a compassionate care physician, which means that I have been certified by the state of Florida to recommend medical marijuana. And as Ms. Rebecca introduced me, I'm the co-founder and the physician overseeing care of my patients at Southern Comfort Marijuana Clinic. This meeting today really is to talk about how we are going to be implementing this Amendment 2, which Rebecca had kind of explained. The vast majority, 71% of Florida voters agreed to pursue in November of 2016. And from a medical perspective, that's what I hope to kind of give you a little perspective today. It's to cover specific conditions. The state had outlined a number of conditions that they felt the science supported enough where these patients were suffering, had enough debility so that they should be given opportunity to access additional therapies, including cancer, epilepsy, glaucoma, HIV, AIDS, PTSD, ALS, Crohn's disease, Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis. And then there's some other kind of caveat diagnosis, one being a medical condition that's of the same class or comparable, that is where my medical education comes in and my discretion for patients who might have conditions outside of this purview. I would be able to qualify them. Specifically, when we start going into chronic pain, I don't certify everybody that is achy. I mean, they really truly have to show that they've exhausted all medical options, or at least been counseled on them, and that they're truly debilitated by definition. And of course, terminal conditions are one of the automatic qualifiers as well once a second physician signs off that they do truly have a terminal condition. And I think this workshop actually was set up pretty well with the different perspectives of the players that are going to be involved in this industry. Again, as a physician, I'm protected under federal freedom of free speech, with the Constitution. I have the right to talk to patients, actually the obligation to be educated about what are the medical options for my patients to help treat them appropriately. And so Condit versus Walters in 2002 says I'm eligible. I'm not even breaking any federal laws by telling patients all the benefits that come with medical marijuana and the possible risks of it and the science behind it and how they should take it and take it safely and appropriately. My other role is just, again, as a patient advocate. I think that's what makes me a primary care physician and specifically a family practice doctor. We were trained to be patient advocates, and that's why I'm here today. So when I am putting in recommendations, which we call certifications, we don't use the word prescriptions in this industry. I am verifying that they do have a qualifying condition. That's my responsibility. I go over their medical records. They have to provide medical records to me to show that they've sought primary care. This is not a primary experimental medication they're using. They've tried other options previously. And I'm verifying that they have Florida residency meeting the additional criteria. I educate them. I spend probably more than an hour educating them just about the science and this whole process. In fact, in order to provide a certification to the state, I actually have to find a piece of scientific literature to attach to my recommendation. So this is not something that just can be fraudulently, passed and prescribed. This has to have real data behind every reason of every decision I make. I am putting science behind my decision. Then everything goes into the Department of Health database that collects the research and the recommended orders and the dosing. So no hand prescriptions are given to patients. They can't go to the dispensary and say, my doctor wrote me this and have my false signature. It's not like that. It's really through a very regulated computer database system that helps then dispense the medications to the patients. And then I spend a lot of time troubleshooting, which is kind of unfortunate as far as a business is concerned. Patients are still having, after they see me, that's the easy part. They then have to get their ID card at the Department of Health, which is really, really backlogged. I was just reading an article yesterday that says the Department of Health has 12 employees, of which 9 are part-time. They field 1,000 to 1,200 phone calls a day. Any point of time, they have 3,000 applications that need to be reviewed. There's 31,000 people already or more that have been deemed that they have a debilitating condition enough where they should be granted access to this, but they've only issued 12,000 ID cards. So I spend a lot of my time and my staff spends a lot of time troubleshooting. And that's one of the reasons why I'm here supporting the dispensaries, because they could also help patients get their cards and navigate them through this system. I'm not going to speak any more about that perspective of the nursery and the dispensary. I'll leave that to Ms. Kimberly. But the Department of Health, the Florida Board of Medicine, the Florida Board of Osteopathic Medicine, and of course the Florida legislation are the ones that are really offering the regulatory powers and the enforcement of the laws to help keep this a clean industry of quality and integrity. The first time I make a certification that is deemed inappropriate, my license is on probation and I face up to a $5,000 fine. And there's specific consent forms that I have to use that say, and I can't have my secretary or anybody else go through the consent. I have to be co-signing it every single time. So this is trying to be as legitimate as possible. And I think Florida is doing it right, keeping it very kind of scientific in this nature. And then you'll be hearing from a law enforcement officer who they have actually access to the database as well. And I think this is to protect the patients who are using medical marijuana from civil and criminal liability so that if they are in possession, they are not, deemed abusers or users. They are just patients at the end of the day, and they should not face any persecution. So they have access to that database as well. Yes. So again, the reason why I was invited was to talk a little bit more about the medical aspects of this. And I want to explain again and emphasize that there is a difference between recreational marijuana and medicinal marijuana. We all think about THC when we talk about recreational marijuana, but there's so much more to the plant than that. There's actually in our body system, this was only discovered as recently as 1993, a body functioning system called the endocannabinoid system. And what it is, it's a neurotransmitter system where chemicals relay from nervous system, and then you have ultimately bodily function. And this cannabinoid system actually exists in every animal, every plant. And when it's in a plant, it's called the phytocannabinoid system. So in the humans, we have two main compounds that kind of regulate our body and bind to these receptors and make things happen, ANA and 2-AG. And these are synonymous to, in a plant, THC and CBD. Now, THC is what provides most of that psychotropic activity, the high that people get when they smoke recreational marijuana. But what the dispensaries have and what provide a lot of the medicinal benefit is actually CBD. And there are so many options when we're talking about medications and ratios of what a patient needs for their specific conditions. And again, that's how I guide them. The dispensaries, when they talk about a low THC product, that they are by law required to have less than 0.8% THC. And that's what most of my patients are starting on and experimenting with. And again, if they have a specific condition, they may need a little bit more THC. And when you add both of them together, it's called an entourage effect. You don't get that psychotropic high when you add the CBD along with it. So it has, these receptors are in every single part of the body. And they regulate the GI tract, your appetite, endocrine, metabolism, mood, memory, immune system, inflammatory regulation, cardiovascular, motor coordination, thermoregulation, reproduction. Every part of your body probably has some sort of coordinated relationship with this endocannabinoid system. And it's amazing to think that with this receptor system being so prevalent that we are just now kind of beginning to understand it. And it's such a novel thing, even though it has such dynamic functioning. So this is just an image about the receptors that are throughout the body. There's actually more receptors in your brain for the cannabinoid receptors than the dopamine or serotonin. So I thought that's just my geekiness coming out. So I have a lot of physicians, a lot of colleagues that say, I just don't know enough about it. There's not enough research. You'll hear that from the layperson or the civilian saying, I'd vote for it, but there's just not enough research. But that's just frankly not true. I don't care if you're saying, oh, it's Scheduled 1, we don't have that research. That doesn't mean research hasn't been being done worldwide. In Israel, it is actually the hub of medical marijuana, and just because, or of marijuana research, I mean, and these studies could be implemented here in the United States and reproduced, but they're not invalid studies. They're definitely valid studies. And we have been doing research on this side. So the University of Mississippi has had a DEA license to grow and cultivate marijuana for the study on humans and plants and animals since 1968. The DEA actually, or the United States government actually holds a patent saying that marijuana does have some medical use. The patent was given in 2003 saying that, yeah, it could be useful in the treatment and prophylaxis of a wide variety of conditions. So to say it's kind of not a viable medical treatment and then hold a patent on it, it's a little bit contradictory. So another thing I really try to emphasize when I do presentations is that you'll hear how marijuana can help so many different conditions. And at the end of the day, you're starting to wonder, well, is this just a snake oil or how does it work? But no, again, there really, really is true science. And now that the technology is catching up with it, we can prove with the measurement of neurotransmitters and activation of receptors to prove how this medicine really, really works. And for example, I just wanted to outline some. I'm not going to go through this slide in completion, but these are the conditions that the state says are acceptable. Like, for example, terminal conditions. There's a lot of palliative ways marijuana can help. And if we are having these celebration of life events for our loved ones, for all of us one day, I think there would be a whole lot more to celebrate if we were not watching them suffer in their last days, but we were watching them gracefully exit. So I think in the terms of palliative care, obviously there is definitely some benefit. In cancer research, yes, there's been studies that say that it can halt, slow down, possibly. I think it should be used, and I encourage all my patients to continue care with your primary provider and use this as a nice symbiotic treatment to go with standard therapies. But it can be used actually to halt cancer so that they could cut it out, or even just the nasty side effects of chemo and radiation could really, really help these patients when they're on 5 other medicines to treat the side effects of one medication. And that's with a lot of conditions. With HIV, we could be slowing down the process of HIV-related dementias and neuropathies, which are very, very difficult to treat once they develop. Glaucoma actually is one of those conditions that does better with THC than CBD to help halt that progression of disease. In psychiatric health, there's just a number of different conditions that can be used to help just balance the neurotransmitters in your brain and in social behaviors as well. And it's kind of funny because we rely on these pharmaceutical medications, yet, we give Adderall to children, yet we know the perils of methamphetamines in our society. We do electroconvulsive therapy on patients, invasive treatments to the brains, where in chronic cannabinoid users, the same nucleus accumbens, the part of the brain that the ECT therapies are trying to treat, are so overwhelmed with cannabinoids in the chronic marijuana users who don't have, significant depression. There's got to be some sort of connection with this. For autoimmune conditions, the way, Humira and methotrexate, these are called biologics, and they come with risks. Increased risk of serious infections like tuberculosis, cancers. They decrease a chemical called TNF-alpha, an inflammatory immune chemical. That's what marijuana does too. So if we have patients that could start taking this and maybe not even more so halting the progression of the disease like Crohn's disease, but if they think that their condition is not as severe and they're not dependent on steroids and having then the side effects of steroids, lifelong steroid use, could be super, super beneficial to Crohn's disease. And one day, hopefully, we get out of this fear of the use of marijuana and we can turn it into an oil for a patient who has psoriasis instead of, subjecting them to these really harsh biologic medications. You can't tell me someone who's got 80% of psoriasis all over their body, who are afraid to leave their home, is not debilitated. It's just I can't really recommend that yet for Florida, but one day hopefully we will be. And there's a number of other conditions. We know epilepsy. That's how this whole discussion started with the Charlotte's Web with the children. Multiple sclerosis. It's an amazing phenomenon that it's one of those diseases that kind of comes and goes, and it's a little bit unpredictable. When a multiple sclerosis patient is in their worst, when they're in a relapse, the cannabinoid receptors in their cerebellum just become super disorganized. But then when they start taking treatment, or they're in their kind of remission state, they do biopsies of the cerebellum and everything is back kind of organized and where it needs to be. With ALS, those patients are so many different medications because there's so many different pathologic processes going on. And once marijuana actually can help with a lot of those, not just the side effects of the medicines, but actually work in the same manner as those medications work. So just even down the line, this whole, if we start, making marijuana legal, our country's going to get fat and we're going to have all these issues of obesity. Well, no, not actually. A third of chronic marijuana users are not obese or less obese. A third of them have less heart disease, diabetes, because it helps with the endocrine, the insulin sensitivities, less risk of heart disease. And there's just so much potential for it. And that's kind of the point. So the etc. page is, the next. This is the and etc. Again, you see this list and you're like, how can it, and this is truly a snake oil, but no, again, science is catching up where I can prove to you, that there is scientific basis of how this medicine works, just as like in any other medication that you're being prescribed. So I think, I always tell my patients if there's anything that we're trying to work on, I say you kind of have to take an inventory because you can't get to where you're going unless you know where you're coming from. Marijuana was actually used as a medicinal product for thousands of years. There's documents from 2700 BC when Emperor Chen Yang was prescribing it for malaria and gout and dementias. In history of all these thousands of years, never had one death from medical cannabis. The caveat is when I say there's receptors all over the body, except for in the brainstem that controls your respiratory or your heart drive. So you're not going to die from cardiopulmonary depression like you would, opiates or phenobarbs or benzodiazepines. So the tide turned in the United States in the 1900s because there was over 2,000 different tinctures being made, and maybe it was being sold as a snake oil. So they started adding morphine to it, and that's where the addiction concept with marijuana started to become connected, and that's where really society started getting political in it. And plus, there was also a little political agenda as well, because that's the time when there was a lot of Mexican immigration. And so that's when, by 1937, by 1930, I think in 1937, 23 states had already kind of made a prohibition. Each individual state had all these different taxes to make it difficult for patients to get. So Henry Anslinger, who served for 23 years in the Commission of Federal Bureau of Narcotics, tried to make this facade that he was going to consolidate all this different types of regulations. And he started making these fanatical assertions that marijuana caused horrendous acts of criminality, and he made these videos of reefer madness. And this was all the while the American Medical Association was annually making publications saying, please stop making legislation for medical conditions without any medical bias. However, in 1970, that's when the Federal Controlled Substance Act made marijuana an illicit drug, just as bad as all the most illicit drugs that there are, saying that they have a high potential for abuse, no currently accepted value in medical use. Again, all the while, marijuana was in the PDR, which is a pharmacopoeia of medication books for a number of 100 years. And there was actually a little asterisk to when the scheduling system was made, and they said that if any research commission then came up and decided there were enough research to declassify a medication, they should be heard and follow those recommendations. So this organization was made, this research council called the Schaefer Committee in 1972. And they did their research, and they concluded not only should we take marijuana off of the classification schedule, we should decriminalize it. And this didn't even go to the Attorney General. The President Nixon just vetoed it then and there. So I have an interesting little quote at the very end, and you're welcome to read it. But basically, there was a political agenda all the while for 32 plus years that hurt our communities and created this false sense of just dire situation with marijuana that really has then affected our communities in a more medical social way later on. So what's been the result of this prohibition and propaganda? Well, we've lost the art of medicine. I'm trained to, see the patient, don't treat lab numbers, know your person. But I speak to so many other medical professionals, and none of them have an opinion of marijuana. In fact, less than 10% of medical schools are even talking about marijuana, the possibilities of it, or bringing up the endocannabinoid system. In states where it's legal, less than 10% of physicians feel comfortable talking to their patients about marijuana. Less than 2% of them are actually recommending. I am completely self-taught in this past year, doing my own research in my own free time, learning about this, changing my mind about what the real benefits. This isn't a gateway to recreational. This is true. This is really, really a medicinal need. And a lot of my community says we should stop calling it marijuana because it has such a negative connotation, and we should start calling it cannabis. It's difficult, though, because that's what the state legislation says, so we have to kind of go with that as well. So in the next few slides, I do want to bring out the point that marijuana is not yet. Okay. That marijuana is not necessarily a gateway. It's sometimes an exit for a lot of patients, and that if we had a better understanding and how it could be used with opiates, I'm not saying get rid of opiates. I'm saying use it with it, use it appropriately. It'd be a lot better. And then this prohibition, what it ended up doing is that marijuana is just not, it doesn't have the health consequences, it has the legal consequences. It has the 4 times higher incarceration for African Americans. And it created this black market dependency and corruption, and it has really, really led to the higher cost of healthcare in the United States. So the National Institute of Health did studies and said that, you know, in areas where dispensaries are allowed, the prescribing practices of each individual physician sometimes was less, and we needed less prescriptions. There were lower admissions into the hospitals from overdoses or inappropriate use and just deaths in general. So these are, and they did studies where there was states that had medical marijuana laws. Then they compared it to places that had dispensaries or places that had, you know, maybe further away access. And this is really more important for areas where active dispensaries directly correlate to the local community's decrease of their opiate addiction issues. So was the political scene for the past 100 years a catalyst for our opiate epidemics? Possibly. It definitely contributed. I've contributed to the opioid epidemic, and I'm not ashamed to mention that because I know for a fact now that every time I write a prescription, there's a 25% chance that person's going to become dependent on it. I know that if a person is using opiates at day number 30, they have a 50% chance that they're still going to be using opiates 3 years later. And then now with the legal crackdown, these patients who are really actually in pain are having trouble getting their prescriptions filled at their pharmacies. Pharmacies may not even be holding it. They get discriminated when they need that pain medication. It's the only option they have. Then there's places like my primary care clinic. It's more and more of us are just making policies. We don't do pain medicine. We just can't. We don't do it. We don't do controlled substances. Leaving patients without options, turning into cheaper methods of heroin and so forth. So this is just a vicious cycle. And in other states, they're using marijuana in rehab facilities to help break that cycle and wean them off, because they've shown that even in psychiatric counseling compared to non-psychiatric counseling, patients who are receiving this synonymously in rehab centers are just doing so much better and having less relapse. So we just need to have a better option, and not just even on opiates. This will definitely help with a lot of prescriptions that patients won't become so dependent on, to the point of there's an estimated in $165 million that may not be going to all these other prescriptions if there was a natural alternative. So basically, we can move forward. And this is a discussion today about the dispensaries and their applicability in our communities. Why are we forcing patients to do Why are we forcing patients to order things online and through the phone and have this delivery system? Because it increased cost for patients who are on disability, who have limited incomes to start with. So delivery is not free, not for a lot of different companies, sometimes up to $45 that adds to the cost of the medicine. Here's actually one funny thing I want to bring up. We all have, at some point, have bought a prescription at the pharmacy. We all also have insurances that encourage us to use these mail-order pharmacies. In fact, you can get a 90-day supply for a two-month supply cost. But we don't. We choose to go to our CVS, our Jackson's, one of the 10 different pharmacies that we have in our community. Why? Because it's convenient. Because having a relationship with a pharmacist is invaluable. Because they provide education, it saves time, it saves confusion. If you get the wrong prescription, you can take it right back. All of those things are super important. Why you need an actual facility rather than being dependent on something that it's like buying pants or shoes on Amazon. You just don't know necessarily if you're going to be getting what you really need to get. So, if we don't have these dispensaries, we lose a lot of education that gets provided to the patients. We can lose a lot of education that gets provided to me and my other colleagues, our other physicians out there that just don't know about this. We lose the interaction for the caregivers who we are placing a lot of confidence to do right and relay that information to a very sick patient. We lose individualized therapy because I only go so far as telling them how much to take, how to take it, things like that. But there's so much more to consider, and maybe Ms. Kimberly can get into that a little bit more. And like I mentioned, it would be great if someone other than myself could help troubleshoot these patients through the very, very complicated system that Florida has created. And I will then now leave the next talks to the speaker of the dispensary, and open up for any questions that are specific to my medical background.
Wow. I got a lot out of that. And so I just want to make sure, back to the first, you don't write a prescription, you certify or something. What do you call it? You call it
Call
certification?
it a prescription. If it were a prescription, then it would become federally regulated. So that's kind of how we get around that. We call it certification, orders, recommendations. And that's what I'm doing. I'm recommending you do it. I'm not holding your hand or writing a prescription for it, but it's something that is independently a transaction between a patient and then the dispensary. It gets housed at the level of the Department of Health. I have to be a certified compassionate care physician to get access to this database. And then I have to put in very, very specific criteria how I want them to take it. Am I doing what percentage of THC versus CBD, milligrams per day, how many units in how many days supply,
right?
As if it were a paper prescription, but nothing goes transferred through the hands of a patient.
The patient goes to the Department of Health out on Midway Road and picks up a card?
Nope. The Department of Health being in Tallahassee, we recommend they either have to mail in an application or they can do it electronically online. They've got to take a specific photo, submit their license, then they have to mail in a check. Sometimes it takes the state 32 days to cash a check. So that's how that process works. Once I just kind of give them as much information I can, and then I just let them on their own to deal with this for 6 weeks. And then they come back to me after they get their medicines and they say, can you remind me how I'm supposed to take this? And then the process starts.
And then you're, how much experience have you, this is kind of new for you, right? So you haven't had a lot, and you said you were self-taught. So how are our other physicians going to learn to do this? Are there going to be
So in order to become a compassionate care physician, the state demands that you go through a compassionate care course. When I was doing it, it was an 8-hour online course. Now it's going to be a 2-hour course. Beyond that, though, I have a professional obligation as well to continue my medical education.
Right.
I've gone to seminars and learned from other experts in other states, and I have met and made contacts with physicians that have thousands of patients on the other coast or who are in Colorado or even Massachusetts, and they respond to my email very well. But a lot of it is doing literature research and kind of figuring out the real science of it.
And so, do you have what experience you've had? You've had success in
Absolutely.
And are you alleviating pain for the most part? Or
100%. I actually yesterday, and I wish I would have asked her if I could present her testimonial to me. I'm getting patients who have said that I've been to 4 different GI doctors for IBS, fibromyalgia. Now, any primary care doctor will know those are I've got that patient coming in. There's nothing I can do for them. They are saying their symptoms are gone. I have someone who said chronic migraines. I've been to so many neurologists, medicines. I just can't tolerate medicines. They've done Botox injections. I'm finally getting a good night's sleep for the first time in forever. So I'm actually getting a lot. I have patients that are experimenting while they're waiting for their card saying, it works. I'm ready to start. I'm ready to try that THC because I know I was hesitant before, but I tried someone else's and I know it works. That's how things are happening. But it's such an individualized medicine, and that's what's very, very tricky about it. Someone might need 2.5 milligrams a day. You have an opiate addict trying to get off that. They might need 1,500 milligrams a day.
It's primarily for alleviation of pain and suffering, not healing. Is that right?
No, I definitely don't encourage, so you're referring to instead of or in lieu of chemotherapies?
No, yeah, I'm just asking. It's not a healing product. It's a product that eases a situation, right?
Is a very subjective term. Healing is something that
that's what a layperson would use. You wouldn't probably.
What is healing? If the person, like I mentioned, Crohn's disease, it may show that they still have active disease in their gut, but if they don't think they're debilitated and they can return to society because their stomach doesn't hurt, are they healed? They still have disease going on, but is it as bad psychologically or physically? Not for that patient.
Okay. Commissioner Perona.
Yes. Wow, that was a roller coaster ride.
Yep.
So let's just say, and there's a lot of notions out there right now. Doctors who prescribe, you said something that it's strongly regulated and enforcement, and you could lose your license. Is that not your medical license you're talking about?
No, I am talking about my medical license.
So your medical license is on the line.
Exactly.
Okay.
The Florida Board of Medicine, I actually attended one of their seminar meetings a couple weeks ago when it was in Miami, and they just hosted another one in Orlando yesterday, or today they were actually hosting it to finalize what the repercussions would be for patients or for physicians who are acting inappropriately. And formalizing the consent forms and the requirements of the consent forms and the requirements of what is significant literature to support your evidence. That discussion was being had today in Orlando.
That may be the reason why a lot of older doctors aren't getting into the business.
And not only that, too, I mean, it's also very difficult when it is still federally illegal. My primary care practice would have been very, very supportive. However, we get grant dollars to help pay for the care for homeless patients, and we get dollars to help provide medications and things like that. So you have to keep separate books and everything like that. Right. It's a complicated thing, and that's why I kind of branched out and started this on my own, because I have those patients that are begging for it.
Yeah. So let's go there for a second, because I'm trying to figure out the business end of the side. So no insurance, obviously.
So what I am advising patients is that, again, once you ask insurance companies to cover for a medication, it's a prescription, that's not covered. That's federally not allowed. Will your insurance company cover for the office visit? I am a primary care physician. I am providing a practical primary care service. I'm talking about their pain. I'm talking about their options. I can be having the same discussion in any clinic that I work at. So I can most certainly I can provide you with a Super Bowl, and I can provide you with my office note. And if your insurance wants to cover office visits, which some of them do, maybe at an out-of-network cost, they could do that. I'm not going to take that time to fight the insurance companies. I'm trying to keep costs down for patients. So I can give them that information if they want. But the legislation says insurance companies are not obligated to cover any of it. But would they, I mean, sometimes they cover you going seeing a holistic doctor or a chiropractor, things like that. It's possible they could cover.
That makes sense.
Yeah, could cover for the visit potentially.
So then comes the issue of, okay, they go to the dispensary and they get the, you don't want to call them a prescription. Product. You get a product, but they have to pay cash for that?
That's correct. They can't, again, my office is a medical office. We can accept credit cards and debit cards and things like that. But once you get to the dispensary, from my understanding, is that it is a cash business.
I was talking to an accounting friend of mine, because the business aspect of this is quite interesting to me. And he was even telling me that from what he understands, all a dispensary can do is deduct cost of sale, no operation costs when you file your tax return.
I'm going to defer to those questions.
No, I know, but I'm just saying, I'm going, oh my God, this really is new water. So
it absolutely is.
Going down through this. So, all right. I am a child of the 70s, but I was in Catholic schools, so I'm going to tell you that I don't have a lot of experience on this issue. Frank, don't even go there. So the difference between medical marijuana and recreational marijuana, let's just call that. What is it if you did both at in 2 different days? What would be the difference between the two?
Right. So the average user, actually the average person that's being registered in this database is 55 and older. And so these are patients that are coming to me saying the same thing. I tried marijuana in the 70s and 80s and things like that. And, my nephew just gave me some and it just made me sick and weird and I didn't like it. Well, part of that is because the marijuana of today is actually grown in concentrated THC, comparing 1970 where it was like 6% to the today marijuana could be 25%. University of Mississippi actually collects what the police brings in and analyzes this. This is how we know this data. But the difference is that the recreational marijuana has been, again, changed over time to be so potent in THC, where I'm talking about something that might be a ratio of CBD to THC of 20 to 1, like a 20 CBD to 1. And that is actually what most conditions respond to. The ones that need THC would be like the Crohn's disease, glaucoma, multiple sclerosis does well in a 1-to-1 ratio, not any more than that. I think that's the point, is that we neglect to say, or, neglect to think about the CBD as the medical value of the plant. And that's really the thing. People come to me and they say, I want to try this, but as soon as I get high, I'm not going to do it anymore. I said, you don't have to get high with this. If you are so nervous, let's start you on the highest potent your highest potent CBD with 0.000% THC. Will you feel unusually hyper relaxed because you've been in the state of spasm for the past 10 years? Yes. And you might call that a body high. Give it 3 days and you might actually start to enjoy that, and not being paid. So there's a difference between being psychologically or cognitively impacted, when you smoke marijuana temporarily, but I don't think necessarily you're going to have that same experience when you do it medicinally.
Okay. And finally, you talked about, medical marijuana being, introduced to a litany of medications for a certain issue. Question popped in my head was, can medical marijuana interfere with any drug treatments that are currently going on?
Yeah, so it's really generally a safe medication. Medscape, which is one of the great resources that physicians use, and they have an interaction checker where you can put in your own personal medications. And there's only like about 5 medications where they say use with caution. And oftentimes it's used with caution and probably with the whole plant, because you're getting the whole product, not necessarily when it's been extracted and it's only CBD or THC. And that would include medications like Coumadin, amiodarone, I think simvastatin's on there, but not the other cholesterol medicines. And it's more of those use with caution. There's none that say absolutely contraindicated. And they have a database of a whole bunch of medications that you can easily populate that. Anybody can do that.
Thank you.
Question.
Thank you.
I just have a couple more. At hospice, this seems like this would, everything that you say is true, and I believe you. This would be a hospice could be a big user of this for
Absolutely. I've actually spoken with the director of hospice as well as their palliative care team at Treasure Health.
Yeah.
And while they are kind of, again, bound by the rules of the federal government and their Medicare reimbursement, they don't want to get involved in that. But they can actually, they have, I believe, referred people out to marijuana clinics and accept them. Now, each individual hospice may have their own protocol and procedures. And I've seen where in other states, there's been anecdotal stories where, hey, this is considered an experimental drug. You're no longer allowed on hospice. Palliative care is a different perspective. It's not the same as hospice. You're still allowed to participate in experimental or just even medical therapy. So I think, though, overall, when I spoke to our community hospice, they do support it.
Yeah. And I also, you mentioned the opiates and the opioid crisis, which we're all beginning to hear a lot about, and the fact that this started with overprescribing of pain medication, the opioid crisis is what we hear.
I was taught in medical school that consider pain the 5th vital sign. We don't get reimbursed by a hospital. Sometimes we can get our patient surveys play into how physicians get reimbursed. And one of those questions, did the doctor adequately treat your pain? This has led then to administrators really encouraging, just give them pain, make them comfortable. And it's just created this bad philosophy of treatment in our society. And we all want quick fixes, instant fixes. If I could give you a pain medicine, or would I tell you to do physical therapy 3 times a week and miss work? Of course you're going to take a pain medication. But the problem is that it's just this, actually there's been no studies about the long-term use of opiate medications. There is none. There's no randomized controlled studies about that. But yet the pharmaceutical companies are peddling this really quite well.
Right. But what my point is what you said is this could be a substitution for.
So the way it works with pain, again, there's a lot of different receptors, and I think actually it could be used not even in substitution. I think it should be used in conjunction with pain management, because what it does is it acts at the mu receptors. That's where opioids hit, and it increases what we call the therapeutic index. So you will need less opiates in order to achieve the same effect, and then though have less constipation, less addiction problems, less respiratory cardio suppression. Yeah. So in conjunction, it's really well. And I believe I saw a statistic that 60% of patients were able to reduce their doses like within a month or so by like 40%. So the general protocol is when I've gone to these seminars, they say, give it 2 weeks and then let that patient start weaning themselves off opiates. And there's tons and tons of anecdotal stories where patients were able to heal themselves.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Anything else? Thank you so much. You really taught me a lot. Thank you. Ms. Grohall, do we have our next speaker?
Next speaker is going to be Kim Hawks with Certera Wellness.
I'm not sure what I can contribute after that.
You mean,
really? I almost
you could just say what she said, right?
Ditto, and then mic
right,
drop. Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
Well, you're welcome here. I'm sure you have something to add.
I do. I'm going to Marco Rubio this real quick.
Sure.